Welcome to The Critique. Today we're looking at a submission that analyzes how the political right's momentum really just fell apart after Charlie Kirk's death due to infighting and conspiracy theories.
It's a really passionate piece, and it feels urgent.
It does. Let's jump right in with the first major point, because I think it can be even stronger. The material is fantastic at capturing the deeply demoralizing feel of this internal conflict, but its intense reliance on these very definitive moral labels, it risks overshadowing the strategic political analysis that I think the listener is really here for.
Yeah, I definitely feel that visceral reaction. You get the sense of betrayal, seeing months of work just undermined. That intensity is powerful. But I have to ask myself, when we're constantly using these extreme labels, things like shock jock or psychopathic narcissist and even Hitler lover, where does that put the focus?
That's it. That's the core of the issue right there. That language, passionate as it is, it focuses so heavily on the individual's what? Their pathology, their character?
Right. It becomes about who these people are.
Exactly. Rather than the systemic vulnerability in the movement that allowed them to do all this damage in the first place. This constant moralize, even if it feels justified, it might inadvertently turn this really sharp critique into just another piece of the shock content it's trying to analyze.
Yeah, we're trying to provide high-level political commentaries. So if the goal is a roadmap for repair, we have to resist just, name-calling and instead focus on quantifying the damage. Is there a risk here that focusing on character just makes it less actionable for someone who's policy-focused?
Absolutely. So the suggestion here is to temper that focus on moral judgment and instead translate those observations into immediate, measurable political costs, strategic failures.
Okay.
Use that strong language, but sparingly, to really land upon. But dedicate more space to the actual quantifiable damage done to that path that was promising.
So let's get concrete on that. The real weakness isn't Candace Owens' character, it's the political failure her actions caused.
Yes.
So instead of just stating she's lying and grifting, the analysis needs to pivot to the specific, tangible political opportunity cost.
Exactly. We need to answer the question, how did this shift to conspiracy drama about Charlie Kirk derail the movement's actual focus? The notes mention these crucial policy areas.
Right, like H-1Bs, Chinese visas.
Or even just preparing for a huge end-of-year event like AmFest. These weren't just ideas, they were immediate political goals. They were critical to keeping momentum.
And when all your time is spent fighting these true crime drama accusations, that is time you are not spending coordinating for AmFest, where donors and operatives get together to plan the next year.
It's a tangible strategic loss. It has real consequences.
And that's the kind of language that's going to resonate.
And it's the same for the accusations against Turning Point USA or Erica Kirk. We need to detail how those actions specifically demoralize allies like Tim Pool and how they discourage people from working together in the future. Show us the cracks in the foundation.
That shows the sledgehammer effect much better than just calling out personal flaws. It shifts the critique from who they are to what they broke.
And that reframing elevates the whole piece. It goes from a passionate complaint to a vital strategic assessment.
Which I think leads us right into the second point, doesn't it? About the structure and connecting the dots.
It does. So, to really hammer home that central claim that the coalition has been splattered, the material needs to structurally solidify the connection between the Candace Owens drama and this parallel issue of platforming the alt-right.
I really like that the piece identifies these two separate but equally destructive things. On one side, you have the true crime soap opera with Owens.
Right.
And on the other, you have this nihilistic MAGA is dead message from figures like Nick Fuentes getting airtime from others.
The piece implies they're working together. It says something like seeing a unity forming with Candace, with Tucker, and that they're both accelerating the same outcome.
But that's the weakness, isn't it? It treats them as just two bad things happening at the same time, not as interlinked forces. We need to define the mechanism. How do they cooperate? Or maybe more likely, how do they feed off each other?
Is that connection between the internal drama, let's call it Faction A, and the alt-right nihilism, Faction B, is that connection ever really nailed down?
I think the reader is left to assume it. We need a specific section that establishes that common denominator, or the synergistic effect. If they aren't actively teaming up, how does one prime the audience for the other?
This is where we have to talk about audience fatigue. We should articulate really clearly Whether the sheer exhaustion from this endless internal drama, does that make young voters more susceptible to the message that the whole system is broken, that MAGA is dead?
That dynamic is so important. If the distraction faction makes the political environment toxic and unproductive, it just creates a vacuum.
A vacuum, right.
And the audience stops seeing a path forward through policy, so they shift their energy to the defection faction, the nihilists, who basically just confirm their pessimism.
Exactly. The drama faction delivers the disillusionment. The alt-right faction provides the ideological escape hatch. That structure needs to be made explicit.
And we have a great opportunity in the notes to ground this, to clarify what responsible platforming even looks like, which is something the author is clearly grappling with.
We can use the examples right from the notes. Specifically contrast the two styles mentioned. You have Patrick Bet-David calling Fuentes out directly on his racism,
Versus Tucker Carlson just letting him talk.
That contrast is everything. It's not just about who you have on, it's about the standard you apply. Using that contrast helps the piece define a positive standard for what discernment actually looks like.
So it stops being just about condemnation and starts providing a clear, actionable yardstick for the future.
Which brings us to our final, and I think maybe the most crucial point. It's about completeness and making the call to action, well, actionable.
Okay.
The argument that the movement needs a clear definition of conservative values to fight all this fragmentation, that's incredibly compelling. But the material needs to explicitly define the positive elements of that definition rather than just relying on what it's not.
Right. As I read it, the core argument is that the movement needs a standard, a North Star, to pull itself back from this infighting.
And the writer is very effective at defining what they're not uniting with. You know, the alt-right, people who go against the Jews, people who engage in stupid infighting. It's very sharp.
But here's the weakness, strategically. The positive vision, the core values the author is calling for, it's scattered. It's not crystallized into an actionable creed. If the goal is to rally people, the listener needs to know what they should be for, not just what they're against.
We need to just systematically synthesize it, gather up all those implied positive values, things like accountability, the common sense lens, policy focus, spiritual edification, and then forge them into a clear affirmative mission statement, something that directly counters the chaos.
That's a challenge, though. Given the crisis, what gets top billing in that statement? Is it the hard policy focus on H-1Bs and so on? Or is it the spiritual grounding? You know, if you lean too hard on the spiritual side, you might lose the policy wonks.
And if you lean too hard on policy, you ignore the moral rot that caused all the drama.
Right.
I think it has to be balanced, but policy-driven first, since that's where the momentum was lost. The most powerful way to frame this is to put the negative action, Owens accusing allies, Fuentes saying MAGA is dead, right up against a defined conservative mission that's pulled from the text's own vision of what success looked like.
So use that successful past state, that pre-fragmentation moment where everything's good and momentum is high. Use that as the foundation.
Exactly. Success was defined by focusing on collective policy goals, on Trump's agenda, on actual news. That becomes the core value that was lost.
And within that, you define the moral standard. So for instance, what is the right Christian approach that Owens is supposedly attacking? It's not just being Christian.
No, it's about applying principles to political action. It's about edification, truth over conspiracy, and prioritizing the coalition over your personal brand.
So by bringing all those elements together into one powerful positive statement, you give the listeners something real to measure things against.
You're not just criticizing the fire, you're drawing a map out of the ashes. And that synthesis is, I think, the most important step for the next draft.
Okay, so just to recap, we've covered a lot of ground on what is already a really powerful analysis.
We have. And to really maximize the impact of the piece, we're suggesting 3 main areas for refinement.
First, it's about translating that powerful moral outrage into a strategic political critique. So less focus on character, more on the measurable political costs, the damage to the coalition.
Second, structurally tighten that link between the internal drama and the alt-right platforming. Don't just list them side by side. Show how one primes the audience for the other, how distraction leads to nihilism.
And finally, and maybe most importantly, proactively define the positive conservative values you're defending. Synthesize that clear affirmative mission statement so the audience has a standard to rally around.
Making these changes will make the argument more robust, more strategic, and ultimately much more influential for anyone looking for a way forward. We're really eager to see the next draft.
Definitely. Apply these suggestions and send your revised work back to us. We look forward to critiquing it on a future show.